The rain had just stopped when Adrian Vale's driver slowed the black limousine at a crowded intersection in downtown Chicago. Water still dripped from streetlights and awnings, turning the city into a blurred painting of gold and gray reflections. Adrian sat in the back seat, barely looking outside. His attention was fixed on the glowing numbers on his tablet screen, numbers that represented profits, acquisitions, and investments worth more money than most people could imagine in 10 lifetimes. At 42, Adrian was the youngest billionaire in the state and the owner of Vale Technologies, a company that had transformed artificial intelligence and automation. Newspapers called him a genius. Business magazines called him ruthless. Employees called him distant. The only thing no one called him was happy. "Sir, traffic is blocked ahead," his driver muttered. Adrian sighed impatiently and finally glanced out the window. At first, he thought his tired mind was playing tricks on him. Standing on the sidewalk near a hot dog cart were 4 children, no older than 8 or 9. 2 boys and 2 girls. Their clothes were simple and slightly worn, their shoes wet from puddles, but that wasn't what made Adrian freeze in disbelief. It was their faces. Every single child looked exactly like him. The same sharp jawline, the same pale green eyes, the same dark hair that curled slightly at the ends. Even the small dimple on the left cheek appeared when one of the boys smiled at his sister. Adrian's breath caught in his throat. What the hell? The driver looked in the mirror. "Sir, stop the car." The limousine halted abruptly. Adrian stepped out into the cold evening air without caring that rainwater splashed onto his expensive shoes. People on the sidewalk glanced at him immediately, recognizing the famous billionaire, but Adrian noticed no one except the 4 children. The children noticed him too. For a long second, everyone stood still. Then the smallest girl whispered, "He looks just like Dad." Adrian felt the world tilt beneath him. A woman emerged from behind the food cart carrying paper bags filled with bread rolls. She was thin, wearing a faded blue coat, and looked exhausted from years of struggle. When she lifted her face and saw Adrian standing there, the bags slipped from her hands. "No," she breathed. Adrian stared at her in shock. Claire, 15 years vanished in an instant. Claire Donovan had once been the love of his life. Before the wealth, before the fame, before ambition hardened him into someone even he barely recognized. They had met in college when Adrian was poor, brilliant, and obsessed with building a future. Claire had loved him before any success arrived, and he had left her behind. Not because he stopped loving her, but because he believed love was a distraction. He had chosen business meetings over dinners, investors over promises, and eventually another city over her tears. He remembered the last night they spoke. "You'll regret this one day," Claire had said. At the time, he thought regret belonged to weak people. Now he wasn't so sure. The children clung to Claire cautiously as Adrian approached. "You," his voice cracked unexpectedly. "These children." Claire looked away. "I never wanted this to happen. They're mine." Silence answered him. Adrian felt as if someone had punched the air out of his lungs. 4 children. 4. And he had never known they existed. The tallest boy stepped forward protectively. "Mom, who is he?" Claire swallowed hard. "His name is Adrian." The boy frowned. "The billionaire from TV." One of the girls stared openly at Adrian's face. "Why does he look exactly like us?" Adrian opened his mouth but no words came out. Claire finally spoke quietly. "Because he's your father." The children froze. Even the noise of the city seemed to disappear. The smallest girl's eyes widened with innocent excitement. "We have a dad," but the older boy looked angry instead. "Then where has he been?" Adrian had faced hostile investors, courtroom battles, and media scandals without fear. Yet nothing had ever made him feel smaller than that child's question. Claire gathered the children gently. "We should go." "Wait," Adrian said quickly. She stopped but did not turn around. "Why didn't you tell me?" Claire laughed bitterly. "Would it have mattered back then? You were already leaving me behind before I even found out I was pregnant." Adrian had no answer. "I tried contacting you once," she continued softly. "Your assistant told me you were unavailable. After that, I realized your new world had no room for us." The words sliced through him. Adrian looked at the children again. They stared at him with curiosity, confusion, and guarded hope. He had missed everything. Their first words, their first birthdays, their first days of school. He had spent years building an empire while unknowingly abandoning his own blood. "Please," he said quietly. "Let me help." Claire shook her head immediately. "We don't need charity. It's not charity." "Then what is it?" Adrian looked directly at the children. "A second chance." For a moment, Claire's expression softened. Then years of pain returned to her eyes. You can't buy your way into their lives, Adrian. I know. And for the first time in many years, he truly did know. Claire reluctantly agreed to let Adrian visit the following day. That night, Adrian sat alone in his penthouse staring out at the city skyline. The apartment felt enormous and empty. Every polished marble floor and designer painting suddenly seemed meaningless. He opened an old storage drawer he had not touched in years. Inside was a photograph of him and Claire at 23 years old, smiling in a tiny apartment with mismatched furniture and dreams larger than their bank accounts. Back then, he had been poor but alive. Somewhere along the way, he had become rich and hollow. The next morning, Adrian arrived at Claire's neighborhood carrying no gifts, no assistants, and no bodyguards. Just himself. The apartment building was old and narrow, with cracked paint and weak heating. It shocked him to imagine his children growing up there while he lived in unimaginable luxury only miles away. The children opened the door before Claire could. You really came, one of the girls said. Adrian smiled nervously. I said I would. The smallest boy studied him carefully. Are you actually our father? Adrian crouched to their level. Yes. Then why weren't you here before? Again, the painful honesty of children struck him harder than any accusation. Because I didn't know about you, he answered truthfully. And because I made mistakes. The children exchanged looks. Finally, the little girl wrapped her arms around him suddenly. Adrian froze in surprise. She grinned. You smell expensive. Claire burst out laughing for the first time since seeing him again. Even Adrian laughed. Something warm cracked open inside his chest. Over the following weeks, Adrian kept returning. At first, the children were cautious. Especially Noah, the eldest boy, who clearly resented him. But slowly, walls began to fall. Adrian learned their personalities one by one. Lily loved drawing animals on every scrap of paper she could find. Emma adored science and asked impossible questions every 5 minutes. Jacob was obsessed with basketball despite being the shortest. And Noah carried a quiet maturity no child should possess. One evening Adrian discovered why. He arrived unexpectedly and saw Noah repairing a broken kitchen chair while Claire coughed violently. Nearby, you take care of everyone? Adrian asked softly. Noah shrugged without looking up. Someone has to. The words haunted Adrian all night. For years, this little boy had tried to be the man Adrian should have been. That realization changed everything. Adrian began spending less time at the office. Investors complained. Business partners panicked. Headlines questioned whether the billionaire genius was losing focus. For the first time in his life, Adrian didn't care. One Saturday, he took the children to the lakeside carnival. The kids screamed with laughter on rides while Adrian watched in amazement. He realized he had never truly noticed children before. They had simply not existed in his carefully controlled world. But these 4 children felt like pieces of his own soul walking outside his body. At sunset, Noah approached him quietly while the others chased balloons nearby. Mom cries sometimes at night, he admitted. Adrian's chest tightened. She thinks we don't hear her, Noah continued. But we do. Adrian looked down at the boy who resembled him so much it hurt. I'm sorry, he whispered. Noah studied him carefully. Are you going to leave again? The question carried years of fear. Adrian knelt slowly. No, you promise. Adrian nodded. I promise. Noah stared another second before hugging him tightly. Adrian closed his eyes as emotion overwhelmed him completely. That night, after the children fell asleep, Claire found Adrian sitting alone on the apartment balcony. You've changed, she said quietly. Adrian gave a faint smile. I had 4 very convincing reasons. Claire leaned against the railing beside him. You know, she murmured, they used to ask me all the time if their father would ever come. Adrian lowered his gaze painfully. I told them maybe someday. And now, Claire looked through the window at the sleeping children. Now I think someday finally arrived. Weeks turned into months. Adrian bought the apartment building anonymously and renovated it entirely so the families living there could have safer homes. He paid for schools, healthcare, and opportunities for his children without turning their lives into a publicity story. But the greatest change was invisible. He became present. He attended soccer games, helped with homework, burned pancakes on Sunday mornings while the children laughed at him mercilessly. For the first time in decades, Adrian felt human again. One evening, Emma climbed into his lap and touched his face thoughtfully. You smile more now, she said. Do I? She nodded seriously. Before, you looked sad on TV. Adrian glanced toward Claire across the room. Maybe he had been sad. Not because he lacked money. Because he lacked meaning. A year later, Adrian stood in the garden of a new house outside the city while his children ran across the grass screaming with joy. Claire joined him under the sunlight. "You know," she said softly, "if that limousine hadn't stopped at that intersection." Adrian looked at the children playing. But it did. He still remembered the shock of seeing 4 identical faces through a rain-covered car window. At the time, it had felt impossible. Now it felt like fate. The billionaire who once believed success meant power, wealth, and control finally understood the truth. Success was hearing 4 children call him dad. And for the first time in his extraordinary life, Adrian Vale realized he was no longer the richest man in the city. He was simply the luckiest.